Over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about why growth stage companies sometimes get legally stuck, even when the business itself is strong. Today, I want to talk about a phrase I hear in most every company that eventually runs into trouble. We'll fix it later. It sounds harmless in the moment. Momentum feels more important than cleanup. Capital is moving, opportunities are coming fast, and no one wants to slow things down. But here's the reality. We'll fix it later is one of the most expensive phrases in a deal. I'm thinking about a company I've worked with for several years as I say this. Great founder, real vision, a business that actually had momentum. But looking back, there were several moments when something surfaced, a structural issue, a documentation question, an ownership gap, and the decision was made to keep moving and deal with it later. At the time, it felt reasonable until later actually arrived. And let me show you why that phrase becomes so expensive. The first reason is leverage shifts the moment a deal appears. Before a financing or an acquisition process begins, founders have options. They control the timing, the narrative, and decide what gets fixed and when. But the moment diligence begins, issues stop being internal problems and they become negotiating points. In this company, the moment that shift happened was when they went to raise additional capital. Investors began asking a simple question. Does the company clearly own its intellectual property? And that question immediately stalled the financing. Because if a company doesn't clearly control its IP, it can't responsibly take investor money. The second reason later becomes expensive is that structural issues compound. Cap table decisions, governance provisions, bridge financing, those issues rarely stay isolated. In this company, several early decisions had seemed manageable at the time. Bridge financing that was meant to be temporary. Governance provisions written anticipating investors who never appeared. Equity granted early to people who didn't ultimately stay with the company. Individually, those issues didn't feel fatal. But when the financing stalled because of the IP questions, everything else started compounding. The board became nervous, the capital structure became harder to explain, and the company suddenly couldn't raise outside capital. Third, later always shows up at the worst possible moments in diligence. Founders often assume they'll quietly fix things when they have time. But most issues surface when every document's being reviewed by investors. And that's exactly what happened here. Questions about IP had been raised early and waved through suddenly had to be addressed under full scrutiny. And when the truth came out, it was worse than anybody expected. The founder who had helped create the IP had actually made side grants tied to that IP and had effectively defrauded the company and its investors. What could have been investigated early became a major crisis later. And fourth, we'll fix it later is so dangerous. You may not control the timeline anymore. Once the financing stalled, the company was stuck. They couldn't raise outside capital until the IP was cleaned up. The board was understandably nervous, and the only person who could keep the company moving forward in the meantime was the founder himself. So the founder ended up bridging the company personally, again, just to keep the business alive while the IP issues were unwound and the structure was repaired. Eventually, the company issued a note to repay that debt, and the company survived. But the structure is still more complicated than anyone would have designed intentionally. They're now holding out for major milestones so they can do a full capitalization round, repay investors, and simplify the structure. The business is still standing, but the path there was far more expensive than it needed to be. Here's the reality most founders don't hear early enough. Structural issues almost never get cheaper with time. They get more expensive because once a deal is on the table, leverage shifts. And founders stop choosing the best option. They start choosing the least painful one. This isn't about slowing deals down. It's about fixing the right things before speed matters. If you're preparing for growth, raising capital, or thinking about an exit, and there are things in the back of your mind that sound like, we'll fix that later, that's worth addressing now. Because in deals, later is rarely cheaper. We've put together a deal readiness checklist that walks through the key structural issues founders should pressure test before a deal is on the line. Click the link in the bio below and download it. It's a simple step that can protect a lot of value.